Hello there. Well, back in March, at the beginning of the first lockdown, I did my very first thought for the day out here in my garden, as some of our more committed viewers may remember. I talked about the way in which seeing the spring flowers determinedly coming out of the ground, having no cause or knowledge of coronavirus, somehow gave me a sense of the bigger picture. Well, we are now facing lockdown number 2, and I'm recording this on the first day of that lockdown. And I have to say, I'm no great enthusiast for a late autumn or early winter lockdown. In childhood, a couple of particularly significant deaths happened at this time of year. And so I suppose I've always looked at the orange and brown leaves as a sign of death and decay rather than beauty. But in childhood, we did have a Virginia creeper on the front of the house that I grew up in, and it was a very distinctive part of autumn. And when we moved here to Oxford, we inherited a rather unsightly shed. And I thought, why not plant a Virginia creeper and see what happens? And behind me, rather evidently, are the pretty amazing deep red leaves for which the plant is famous. And it has cheered up what otherwise would have been a rather dull bit of decking. It has taken a couple of years for the plant to get to this point, and part of the reason for drawing your attention to it is to remind myself and you of the importance of taking the long view, not least as lockdown begins. But as anyone who's ever planted something will know, often you have to wait years to really see the benefit. And part of my ongoing reflection through the whole experience of lockdown number 1 and now looking ahead to number 2 has been about thinking of the distinctive, enduring hope that Christianity offers at a time like this. Not just the promise of eternal life, but the joy and hope of life in the kingdom expressed and lived in the here and now. And today I want us to think particularly about our relationship with God as Father and what that means for how we face times of challenge or even frustration. We've just had our last in-person act of worship for the postgrads community before lockdown. And as various postgrads led us in prayer, one began their prayer with these words, "Hi, Dad." Now perhaps you pray to God like that all the time, or perhaps like some of the postgrads, that was a surprising thing to hear. In Romans 8, of course, we read, and I was prompted to think of this because I talked about another part of Romans 8 back in the garden in March. In Romans 8 we read, "You received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his children. Now we call him Abba, Father. For his Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering." Paul manages in the space of just a few sentences to place together this reality of this intimate relationship that we have with God as our Father, alongside the reality that we will still face suffering. Indeed, we are called to participate in something even approaching the suffering of Christ himself. Well, on this theme of what it is to know God as our Father, I also want to draw our attention to Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus famously asks, "Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him?" It is such a beautiful promise, but I think it's a really important reminder, not least at a time where we may be thinking that God seems distant or remote or aloof, that actually what God promises is this relationship of the good father to his beloved child, the father who longs and enjoys lavishing good gifts on his children. Of course, those words of Jesus are immediately preceded by some other well-known ones, which are often quoted in relation to our approach to prayer. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Well, it is self-evident that this doesn't mean that any request we make to God will simply be responded to in the affirmative. I suspect churches would be full to overflowing all over the world if that turned out to be the case. But if what we're asking is about the relationship with God, does he respond if we come to him in faith, knock on his door, as it were? That invitation is always responded to by God in the affirmative. Whatever we've done, whoever we are welcomed in. For several weeks, while we've been enjoying being able to worship in St Aldate's, we've been meeting under the banner by the artist Charlie Mackesy depicting the prodigal son returning to his father's embrace. And whether our Christian faith is long in the tooth or new and or tentative, at a time like this when we face lockdown in winter with shorter days and less easy circumstances to be meeting people outside, nonetheless there is this distinctive hope in God, because this God is not remote or aloof, but he's a father who loves us to draw close to himself, and who promises bread rather than a stone, and who meets us with an open door and an open heart. And may that be a genuine comfort and inspiration to us, even as we begin together to face lockdown number 2.